at Darden think about what we would call a four-step learning process. It's a fairly simple process. It's one that we use to manage our case method programs in executive education, in our MBA programs in 3 different formats, in our doctoral programs as well. We think it's important first that individuals prepare in advance of class. Many lecture-oriented courses, for example, would not make that assumption. They may or may not assign, and they may or may not assume that students will have read the assignment, and they may lecture what they assign to be read, so that the implication to students is, you don't have to read it, we're going to tell you what it is. But we assume in our case method culture that individual preparation is a very key component. We're going to expect that whether you're a C-level officer in an executive education program, whether you're an MBA student in our full-time program, or anything in between, that for each and every class you've had a reading assignment, you know how to read, and you have read. Now, for people who are dyslexic, for example, or reading in a second language, or have a history of not liking, they prefer to hear things audially rather than to see them visually in a book, this is a bit of a struggle. It requires the strengthening of a muscle that they may or may not have developed thus far in life. Nevertheless, it's our philosophy that this is important. The second step in our process is learning teams. So we will divide executives, practicing managers, and people in our full-time and part-time programs into learning teams of 4, 5, or 6 people. Typically, we try to do that with a diverse background so that the perspectives they bring to whatever thing they're preparing will be diverse, and they can lever that diversity of thought and experience. And the purpose of the learning teams is not necessarily that they would come up with a common presentation or analysis, but rather to help each other make sure that they're familiar with the various pieces of the case, the data in the case, the analytic framework that we're trying to use to parse out what's going on in that particular case, to make sure that they've got that set of case facts in their head before they go into class. This is important also because if you're doing 600 different cases, then you want to have people not forgetting which case was where and who are we talking about, and so forth. So the learning team is a way of, in a small group setting, sharing background, helping each other, making sure that everybody has a chance to speak, making sure that everybody has got at least 3 basic things in mind. Do we know what the issues are? Do we know how we're going to analyze them? And do we have some thoughts about what we're going to do about those things? And then the third piece, which for some people who try to use cases but don't really have a philosophy of learning, there's the in-class discussion. And we've spent a lot of time in other segments talking about how you start, how you manage the discussion, how you create a bubble, how you end a class. There's a lot that goes on to how do you manage that 60 minutes, that 75, 85, 90-minute, 2-hour classes when things are actually going on. So I won't repeat those here. But then the fourth and frequently most important step, which many people will forget, is after the class is over, before you rush out to meet your friends or get a refreshment or go to the restroom, take a few minutes and think about, what have you learned from this? What were the important seashells you picked up in that walk along the beach? What were the ideas that you found provocative? And it'll be different for everyone. But to Alinsky's point, if we don't do that, if we don't stimulate and encourage people to make sense of the happenings that keep tumbling over them in every minute and hour of life, then we're actually inhibiting the learning process. So we want to make sure that consciously and explicitly we encourage students to say, manage your own habits, manage your own historical thoughts about how learning takes place. And in doing that, we're going to invite you to pause, reflect on, meditate on, think about, consolidate what's just happened in your life and bring that into yourself in a way that it becomes more readily yours, that it's something that you can use and something that you can draw on.